My name is Nadia Ashmore. I'm 29 years old, and for most of my life, my family treated me like a clerical error, something that had been filed in the wrong drawer and quietly forgotten. My sister Celeste had a Wharton undergraduate degree, a Columbia MBA, and a father who introduced her at dinner parties the way men introduce racehorses they've bet everything on. Beautiful, fast, built for this. I had dyslexia, a studio apartment in Wicker Park, a salary that barely cleared $43,000 a year, and a job at my father's company that existed mostly to keep me from becoming what he called an embarrassment by absence. What none of them knew, not my father, not Celeste, not the 16 board members who'd sat across from my grandmother for 30 years, was that my grandmother Ruth had spent the last 4 years of her life building something. Quietly, patiently, the way she'd built everything she ever made. She left me 52% of Ashmore Capital, the company my father had run for 2 decades, the company Celeste had been groomed since childhood to inherit. The company valued, as of last March, at $91 million. I found out in a hotel ballroom, 1,200 people present. My father standing at a podium, mid-speech, in the middle of formally handing my sister the future of everything my grandmother had built. This is what happened. Let me start where it actually starts. Not with the ballroom, but with a kitchen table in Lincoln Park on a Tuesday evening in November 2007. I was 9 years old. My teacher had sent home a note, the kind that comes in a sealed envelope, which is a specific form of cruelty toward children, because you have to carry it home knowing whatever's inside is going to change the temperature of the room you live in. The note said I was falling behind, that I reversed letters, that I read at a second-grade level when I should have been tracking at fourth, that I might benefit from a formal assessment. My father, Warren Ashmore, read it at the kitchen table. He set it down, looked at my mother and said, "We're not doing that. Not let's figure this out. Not what does she need. Just, we're not doing that." As if the assessment itself was the problem. As if naming a thing would make it real. My mother, Diane, agreed the way she agreed with most things Warren said, immediately, quietly, with a small nod that I spent years interpreting as agreement and eventually understood was just self-preservation. That was the night the story of who I was got written. And I wasn't in the room for the part that mattered. The Ashmores were Chicago money. Not the oldest kind, not the flashiest kind, but the durable kind. The kind that comes from actually building something rather than simply inheriting the idea of something. My grandmother Ruth had started Ashmore Capital in 1968 from a single-room office on the South Side with $3,000 she'd saved from 6 years of bookkeeping work. She bought her first property, a 2-flat in Bridgeport, at 31 years old. By the time I was born, Ashmore Capital managed commercial real estate across 4 states and had a board of directors that included 2 former aldermen and a woman who'd been on the Federal Reserve Advisory Council. Ruth built all of that. My father inherited it in 2009 when she stepped back from day-to-day operations. He was a competent manager, careful, politically savvy, good with clients, but he had never built a single thing from nothing. And I think, somewhere under all that confidence, he knew it. Men who know they didn't truly earn something spend a lot of energy making sure everyone around them believes they did. My sister Celeste was his proof. She was 3 years older than me, and from the time she was 12, she had been positioned as the continuation of the Ashmore story. Groomed is the right word, though no one in our house would have used it. And they would have said prepared. They would have said invested in. But what they meant was shaped into the version of a daughter that a man like my father needed to believe he'd produced. She was sharp. I want to say that clearly. Celeste wasn't a fraud. She worked hard. She was genuinely talented with numbers and strategy, And she understood business the way some people understand music, intuitively, almost physically. Her Wharton degree was earned, her Columbia MBA was earned. Her ability to walk into a room full of skeptical people and leave with their confidence was real. But she also watched what was happening to me year after year and never once said, "That's wrong." That part I have a harder time finding generous language for. Growing up with undiagnosed dyslexia in a family that had decided not to diagnose it means growing up with a specific kind of shame that doesn't have a name. It's not the shame of failure. You can work around failure, you can improve, you can try again. It's the shame of wrongness, of being built in a way that seems to confuse and inconvenience the people around you, of watching other kids read a paragraph in 45 seconds and understanding, at a cellular level, that you are different in a way that matters to the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally. I learned to compensate, not because anyone helped me find compensations, but because I had no other option. Audiobooks at night with my bedroom door closed. Because my mother had once asked why I was listening to stories instead of reading like a normal child, and I hadn't had an answer. Color-coded diagrams on index cards, because visual patterns stuck in my memory when words slid off. A whole private system of understanding information that I built entirely alone, over years, in silence. Celeste brought home A's. I brought home C minuses, and a reputation. My father had a phrase he used when I was mentioned in conversations where achievement was the topic. He'd pause, recalibrate, and say, "Nadia is more of a people person," which sounds like a compliment until you understand that in our family, in that context, it meant, "She's not built for this," but we're too polite to say so in front of guests. At my cousin Jamie's graduation dinner, I was 14, my father gave a toast about the next generation of the family. He talked about Celeste for 4 minutes. He mentioned me in one sentence. And Nadia, of course, is finding her own path. Finding her own path. When you're 14 and your father says that about you in front of the entire extended family, you understand exactly what it means. It means, we don't know what to do with her. It means, she's not part of the plan. I stared at my plate. My grandmother Ruth, seated 2 chairs to my left, reached under the table and put her hand over mine. She didn't say anything. She just held on. She always held on. Ruth's apartment was on the 14th floor of a building on Lakeshore Drive with windows that faced the water. I went there every Sunday from the time I was 8 until she got sick, and those Sunday afternoons were the only place in my childhood where I felt like I was allowed to be the actual size I was. She taught me things in a language I could receive. Not words on a page. Stories. Case studies. She'd spread old contracts across her dining room table, the original property agreements from the 1970s and 80s, and walk me through them not line by line, but architecturally. This is what the seller needed. This is what we needed. Here's where those two things didn't match, and here's how we found the gap. She drew diagrams. She asked me questions. She let me answer slowly, without rushing me toward the right answer, which was something no teacher had ever done. "Nadia," she told me once, when I was maybe 11, "you see around things. Most people see through them, straight at whatever's obvious. You go around the edge and you notice what's on the side. That's not a weakness, sweetheart. That's how every interesting problem eventually gets solved." I didn't know what to do with that. I tucked it somewhere and tried to keep it safe. She also said once, in the winter of 2016, I was 21, home from my second year at the University of Illinois, where I was studying urban planning because it was the only academic subject that let me think spatially instead of verbally. She said, "Your father loves you, but your father is afraid of what he doesn't understand, and he has never understood you." "Doesn't that hurt you?" I asked. "That he inherited your company and he still thinks that way?" She was quiet for a moment. She looked out at the lake. Hurt isn't the right word. She turned back to me. Disappoints me? Yes, but I've been disappointed before. What matters is what I do about it. I didn't understand what she meant by that until 4 years later, sitting in her apartment, when she pressed a small wooden box into my hands and told me to keep it safe. Don't open it yet, she said. You'll know when. I graduated from U of I in 2017 with a degree in urban planning and a GPA that looked unremarkable on paper but had cost me more per grade point than anything Celeste had ever earned. I applied to Ashmore Capital because it was my family's company, and because I genuinely believed, at 22, that contribution could earn visibility. My father offered me a position as a junior project coordinator. Salary $43,000. My desk was in an open plan area on the 7th floor, where I shared space with 3 other junior staff and a printer that jammed every 45 minutes. Celeste had joined the year before as Director of Acquisitions. Her salary was listed in a company filing I found by accident, $260,000 plus performance bonuses. My job was to track permit applications, coordinate between contractors and building managers, and maintain filing systems that no senior person ever looked at. I wasn't invited to strategy meetings. I wasn't copied on acquisition discussions. I was handed work that needed to exist for regulatory reasons and trusted to do it correctly and quietly. I did both. But here's what nobody planned for. I was very, very good at the actual work underneath the work. Permit applications meant reading city planning documents, zoning ordinances, infrastructure reports. Dense material that most people skimmed. I couldn't skim. My brain didn't work that way. It processed everything or nothing. So I read it all. Slowly. Fully. With the color-coded index card system I'd been running since I was 12. And what I started to notice, buried in those documents, were patterns. Specifically, I noticed that 3 of our major Chicago properties had zoning classifications that were about to change under a city infrastructure initiative nobody in our acquisitions team seemed to have flagged. The change would affect lease values significantly, downward for 2 properties, and upward for 1, if the footprint were repositioned correctly before the reclassification locked in. I wrote a memo. 3 pages, diagrams included. The way Ruth had taught me to think about contracts, as structures, not as language. I put it in my supervisor's inbox on a Friday afternoon. Monday morning, I came in to find the memo had been forwarded to the acquisitions team. Celeste had responded to it in the chain, and the response was 1 sentence. Where did this come from? My supervisor's reply, junior coordinator. Not sure of the source material. Will verify. The analysis was sound. The city documents were public record. The implications were real. 2 months later, Ashmore Capital repositioned the flagged property and avoided a significant lease devaluation. My name appeared nowhere in the internal record of that decision. I kept writing memos. I kept putting them in my supervisor's inbox. I kept watching the ideas move up through the company and the credit stay at the top. I told myself this was how things worked. That patience was the strategy, that eventually someone would notice. I was still telling myself that in March of 2023, when I found the email, I wasn't snooping. I want to be clear about that, not to be defensive, but because the way you find out things matters to the story of what they mean. I was in the records room on the 6th floor, pulling a 2019 permit file that the acquisitions team needed for a due diligence review. The records room was shared with overflow from my father's executive assistant's files. Her cabinet was labeled but not locked. An accordion folder had been misfiled in the section where I was working. I put it back, but not before the label caught my eye. Succession, confidential. W. Ashmore/C. Ashmore. I held it for maybe 5 seconds. Then I put it in the correct drawer and walked out. That night I couldn't sleep. Not because of what I'd seen. I hadn't seen anything, just a label, but because of the calm, settled certainty with which I understood exactly what was inside. A week later, I had the confirmation I didn't need. My father called me into his office, in which he did approximately 4 times a year, and told me the company was planning a major restructuring, that Celeste would be taking on an expanded leadership role, that my position was being evaluated for alignment with the new structure. He said it with the careful neutrality of a man who had rehearsed it. He asked if I had any questions. I said I didn't. He nodded, clearly relieved, and told me his assistant would be in touch with HR about next steps. On the elevator down to the 7th floor, I understood. Next steps meant out. The Ashmore Centennial Gala was in 6 weeks, the company's 55th anniversary. 1,200 guests expected at the Lyric Opera House. Black tie. The kind of event my father lived for. Large, witnessed, designed to perform legacy. I went home that night and stared at the wooden box on my closet shelf for the first time in a long time. I didn't open it, but I thought about what Ruth had said. You'll know when. The Lyric Opera House is one of those Chicago spaces that makes you feel small on purpose. High ceilings, baroque everything. The kind of room that was designed in an era when architecture was expected to communicate importance before anyone spoke a word. On the evening of April 19th, 2024, it was full of people I'd known my whole life, former aldermen, property developers, a federal judge my father golfed with, extended family members I saw twice a year at events exactly like this one, clients, partners, board members, and a category of person that exists primarily at functions like this one. People who wanted to be seen adjacent to the Ashmore name. I wore a navy dress I'd bought the previous year for a friend's wedding. It fit. I'd done my own hair. I sat at table 11, which was toward the back third of the room, which told me everything I needed to know about how the evening had been staged. Celeste was at the head table. She was wearing a gown that looked like it had been designed for this specific night, midnight green. Perfect. Her hair pinned back in a way that said she'd had professional help and wasn't embarrassed about it. She looked like someone who belonged where they were sitting. My mother found me during cocktail hour, hugged me briefly, and said, "You look nice, sweetheart. Try to have fun." Then she drifted back toward the people she needed to circulate with. I got a glass of water and found my table. At 8:15, the room went quiet. The lights dimmed. My father walked to the podium. Warren Ashmore was 63 years old and had the physical presence of a man who had spent decades in rooms like this one. Silver-haired, broad-shouldered, entirely comfortable with being looked at. He spoke without notes. He always spoke without notes. It was a thing he was proud of. He talked about Ruth first, about what she had built, what she had sacrificed, what she had believed about this city and this company. He said the right things. He'd always known the right things to say about her in public. It was the private behavior he'd struggled with. Then he talked about Ashmore Capital's future. 55 years ago, one woman changed what was possible for this family. Tonight, I'm proud to continue that tradition by naming the person who will carry this company into its next era. He looked at Celeste. My daughter Celeste Ashmore has spent the last 8 years proving that the best of what Ruth built lives on. She has my complete confidence, the board's complete confidence, and beginning January 1st, 2025, she will serve as president and CEO of Ashmore Capital. Applause. The kind that fills a room from floor to ceiling. 1,200 people standing, because the people who set the social temperature stood first and everyone else followed. Celeste rose from her chair. She was crying, or doing an excellent performance of crying, and my father hugged her at the podium and cameras clicked, and the whole room felt the way rooms do when they're being documented for legacy. I sat at table 11 with my glass of water and thought, this is it. This is the moment she described. Then I heard a voice to my left. "Miss Ashmore?" I turned. A man I didn't recognize. Early 60s, slight build, gray suit, the careful stillness of someone who spent their professional life managing other people's most significant moments. He had been standing just outside my peripheral vision, and the fact that I hadn't noticed him until he spoke told me he was very practiced at not being noticed. "I'm Thomas Bryce," he said. "I was your grandmother's attorney." He placed a cream envelope on the table in front of me. Heavy stock, sealed with red wax. A notary stamp from Bryce and Whitmore, dated October 3rd, 2019. "Your grandmother left instructions," he said. "I was to deliver this document on the evening your father publicly named his successor. She anticipated it would happen at a company event." He glanced toward the stage, where my father and Celeste were still receiving the room's applause. "She was very specific about the timing." He looked back at me. She said, "Give this to Nadia when Warren shows her exactly who he chose." My hands were not steady when I picked it up. "What is this?" "Her will," he said. "The one your father doesn't know about." He produced a card from his breast pocket. "I'll be available when you have questions." And you will have questions. Then he turned and walked toward the back of the room, unhurried, the way people move when they've been waiting a long time for something and they finally don't have to wait anymore. There's a service corridor behind the main hall at the Lyric that smells like floor polish and old wood. I found it by following a catering staff member through a door and then standing in the fluorescent quiet while the applause from the main room moved through the walls like weather. I broke the wax seal. 3 pages, dense and formal, the specific architecture of legal language I'd been learning to read since I was 8 years old at a dining room table on Lakeshore Drive. I, Ruth Eleanor Ashmore, being of sound mind and body, do hereby revoke all prior testamentary documents and declare this to be my last will and testament. I read it the way Ruth had taught me to read contracts. Not word by word. Structurally, looking for the load-bearing pieces. I found it on the second page. To my granddaughter, Nadia Claire Ashmore, I bequeath 52% of my shares in Ashmore Capital LLC, along with all associated voting rights, currently valued at approximately $47 million. I read it 3 times. Then I read the paragraph beneath it. "This bequest is made with full knowledge of how my son Warren has treated Nadia throughout her life. She has been dismissed, diminished, and systematically excluded from the company I built, not because of any failure of hers, but because of a failure of imagination in the people who were supposed to see her clearly." My throat closed. Nadia does not have a disability. She has a different architecture of mind. I recognized it because I have watched her use it, every Sunday for 20 years, to see things that trained professionals missed. Warren never looked long enough to notice. That is his poverty, not hers. I pressed my back against the corridor wall. I have also included, within the accompanying documents, evidence of conduct that the Ashmore Capital Board will need to examine. Warren will know what it refers to. This bequest exists in part to ensure that evidence reaches the right people. The third page, a condition. To activate the inheritance, I had to formally petition for an emergency board meeting within 60 hours of receiving the document. Failure to act would render this will null and void, and all assets would transfer under the 2015 testament. 60 hours. The deadline fell at 8:15 on the evening of April 21st. I stood in that service corridor for 4 minutes. Through the wall, I could hear the orchestra starting back up. The warm social hum of 1,200 people celebrating something I had just, in some fundamental way, changed. Thomas Bryce was waiting near the coat check, exactly where he'd said he would be. "The 60-hour clause," I said. "Your grandmother's design." He handed me a second card with a handwritten number on the back. "She said unlimited time would let you talk yourself out of it. The deadline is permission, not pressure." I looked down at the envelope, the wax seal still in pieces in my palm. She planned this the whole time. From 2019, yes. She saw what was coming. He paused. She wanted you to be ready when it arrived. And if I choose not to act? He was quiet for a moment. Then a version of what just happened in that ballroom becomes permanent. And in 15 years, Ashmore Capital is run by people who made the decisions in that room tonight, without any memory of who built it. I looked at the card, then at the envelope. I'll call you in the morning. He nodded as if he'd known exactly what I would say. She said you would. I opened the wooden box that night. My studio apartment in Wicker Park was small enough that the kitchen table was also, the workspace was also the place I ate breakfast, and I sat at it at midnight with the box and the will and my laptop and a cold cup of tea I'd forgotten about. Inside the box, a handwritten letter in Ruth's handwriting. The careful, deliberate script she'd used since arthritis started making it harder, each letter fully formed, nothing rushed. Beneath it, an original document with a 1968 date stamp, the founding partnership agreement for Ashmore Capital, and a USB drive. I read the letter first. My dearest Nadia, if you're reading this, Thomas has done his job, and your father has done what I feared he always intended to. I'm sorry I couldn't change the years between now and when I had to let go, but I can change what comes next. The founding agreement establishes that my original shares carry permanent voting rights that cannot be diluted or transferred without full board approval. Warren has never read it carefully. He's always been more interested in the present tense of power than in the historical documents that define it. The USB contains something else. In the spring of 2017, your father proposed a resolution to the board to reclassify my role from active director to advisory only, which would have reduced my voting rights to ceremonial. His stated reason, modernizing governance. His actual reason, I had voted against 2 of his major acquisition proposals, and he was tired of losing. The board rejected the resolution 5-3. I was one of the 5. I recorded the session, as was my right as a shareholder. When what your father said about me in that room, about my age, my relevance, my capacity to understand the company's direction, is documented. Use this with judgment, not with anger. I built Ashmore Capital because I wanted to build something that lasted. I'm leaving it to you for the same reason. Not because you're better than anyone, because you're the only one who will steward it the way it was meant to be stewarded. You see around things, remember? Go around. All my love always, Grandma. I plugged in the USB. The file was a 64-minute audio recording, labeled Board Session, April 12th, 2017, full recording. I put in my earphones. I listened to 17 minutes of it. That was enough. My father's voice, clean and confident, telling the board that Ruth's connection to the company is sentimental at this point, not strategic. That she was attached to a model of real estate development that the market had moved past. That with respect to her contributions, there comes a moment when continuity requires transition. Ruth had been in the room. She had been 69 years old, sharp as she'd ever been, and her own son was telling a room full of people that she was past her usefulness. I closed the laptop. Then I opened it again, opened my email, and typed a message to Thomas Bryce. I'm ready. Tell me what I need to do. His response came at 6:45 in the morning. An emergency board petition required the signatures of 3 sitting board members. Thomas had already been in contact with one, Dorothy Calloway, who had served on the Ashmore Capital Board for 22 years, who had been Ruth's closest business partner for longer than that, and who had, according to Thomas, been waiting for exactly this phone call for approximately 3 years. I called her at 8 a.m. Her voice was the voice of a woman who has been in enough rooms to know exactly what kind of room any given call is before the other person speaks. Nadia Ashmore. I wondered how long it would take. You knew about the will? Ruth told me in 2020. She made me promise not to act unless you initiated. A pause, and in it, something warm and complicated. She knew you needed to choose this yourself. Dorothy, I need 2 more board signatures for the petition. I know. I've been having informal conversations with 2 board members for the better part of 18 months. Philip Hartwell and Grace Yuen. They both have concerns about the direction of the company under your father's leadership. Strategic concerns, not personal ones. They've been quiet about it because there was no mechanism for their concerns to go anywhere, and now there is. And now, she said, there is. I'll have all 3 signatures to Thomas by noon. Board meeting can be called for April 21st, 10 a.m. That gives you 36 hours to prepare. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Her tone shifted. Not cold, but exact. Your father is going to come at this hard. He'll say Ruth was manipulated. He'll say the will was executed under duress. He'll say you're a grieving grandchild who's been coached by an attorney with an agenda. He's going to do it in front of 16 people who've worked with him for a decade. I know. Do you? He's been doing a version of that my whole life. The difference is, now I have evidence. Dorothy was quiet for a moment. Then, Ruth said something to me once. About you. She said, Nadia absorbs everything and shows nothing, and one day that's going to matter enormously. I'm starting to see what she meant. My father found out about the board petition on the afternoon of April 20th. Celeste called me 40 minutes later. She didn't start with hello. She started with, "What have you done?" I was at my kitchen table, going through the board minutes Thomas had sent me, color-coded, indexed, the same system I'd used since I was 12. I don't know what you're talking about. The board secretary just sent Dad a notice. Emergency session tomorrow. Requested by Dorothy Calloway. A pause waited with controlled fury. Dorothy Calloway hasn't called an emergency session in 11 years. What did you do? Maybe she has concerns about company governance. Nadia. Her voice dropped to something dangerous and precise. Kian, if you're trying to make a point, if this is about last night, you need to stop. This is the company. This is our family's name. I know what it is, Celeste. You're going to embarrass yourself. You don't know how boardrooms work. You don't know these people the way Dad and I know them. Maybe. I kept my voice level. Or maybe I've been in the copy room of that company for 6 years reading every document that passes through it, and I know more about its structural vulnerabilities than anyone who was sitting at the head table last night. Silence. Don't do this, she said, quieter now. Get some sleep, I said. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. She hung up. Through my kitchen window, the Chicago spring was doing what it always does in April. Threatening to be warm and not quite committing. I looked at the city for a while. I thought about Ruth, about all the Sunday afternoons on Lakeshore Drive, about every time she'd held my hand under a table when everyone else was looking somewhere more important. You'll know when, she'd said. I knew. Ashmore Capital occupied floors 6 through 14 of a building on Wacker Drive. The boardroom was on 14. Floor-to-ceiling windows facing the river, a table that could seat 20. The kind of room that had been designed to make the people sitting in it feel like the decisions made there carried real weight. Most of the time, that feeling is theater. Today it wasn't. I arrived at 9:40 in a gray blazer I'd had for 4 years and a pair of black trousers that fit well. I was carrying a leather portfolio, my own this time, with 3 printed copies of the will, a printed transcript of the key passages from the 2017 board recording, the founding partnership agreement, and a 2-page prepared statement I'd written and rewritten 4 times the previous night. The security guard at the boardroom level checked a list and then looked at me with the specific confusion of someone whose list doesn't match the person standing in front of them. Nadia Ashmore. I have standing to address the board. He checked again. You're not on the authorized attendee list for this session, ma'am. No. I know. I smiled at him, not the placating kind. Dorothy Calloway authorized my attendance. You can confirm with her directly. He picked up his phone. While he was calling, I heard the elevator open behind me, my father's voice first, then Celeste's. I turned. Warren Ashmore in a full suit, which told me he'd been called back in despite this being a Sunday. Celeste beside him, also in professional dress, her composure assembled and locked. Behind them, my mother, which surprised me. Diane never came to board sessions. My father saw me and stopped walking. The precise quality of the silence between us was something I'll carry for a long time. Every version of that silence from my whole life, compressed into 3 seconds. Nadia. His voice was calm, the way concrete is calm. What are you doing here? Good morning, Dad. I have something to present to the board. That's not how this works. He moved toward me. Go back to your desk. We'll discuss this later. She has standing. Dorothy Calloway appeared in the doorway behind him. 74 years old, silver-haired, 4 decades of board experience in her posture. She looked at my father without warmth. I authorized her attendance. She has material relevant to this session. Dorothy looked at me. Come in, Nadia. My father's jaw tightened. Something passed through his face that I'd seen before, the machinery of a man recalculating. Then, fine. Let her speak. The board can hear whatever she has to say. He looked at Celeste. I could read his confidence clearly. She'll embarrass herself. Fine, I said. Let's go in. 16 board members. My father at one end of the table, Celeste to his right in an observer chair. She wasn't officially a board member yet, but she'd been seated there by habit. Dorothy, Philip Hartwell, and Grace Ewan along the left side. Thomas Bryce in a corner chair with his briefcase. The board chair, Margaret Osei, who had known my grandmother, who had been appointed to the board in 2015, and had always treated me, the few times our paths crossed, with the particular respect of someone who'd been watching carefully from a distance, called the meeting to order. This emergency session was requested by Dorothy Calloway, Philip Hartwell, and Grace Ewan. Dorothy, the floor is yours. Dorothy rose. Thank you, Margaret. I'll be brief. A document has come to light that materially affects the ownership and governance structure of this company. I yield to Nadia Ashmore. 16 pairs of eyes. My father's face, completely controlled. Celeste's, arranged into something between contempt and concern. I stood. Thank you, Dorothy. And thank you to the board for allowing this session. I opened my portfolio. My father raised his hand. Margaret, before we proceed, I think it's worth noting the context here. My daughter has no governance role, no legal standing in company operations, and no formal business qualifications. With respect to whatever she's come to present. Warren. Margaret's voice was not unkind, but it was absolute. She's been given the floor. He sat back. The way he did it told me he expected this to resolve in his favor within the next 20 minutes. What I'm about to present, I said, may be unexpected. I ask only that you review the evidence before reaching conclusions. I placed the will at the center of the table and slid it toward Margaret. This is the last will and testament of Ruth Eleanor Ashmore, founder of this company, notarized October 3, 2019. My father went still. Not the calm stillness of a man who is waiting. The rigid stillness of a man who has just heard something that shouldn't be possible. My mother's will was executed in 2014. His voice came out controlled, but fractionally thinner. I have a copy. You have her prior will. Under Illinois estate law, a subsequent valid testament revokes all preceding documents. I looked at Thomas. Mr. Bryce, would you authenticate the document for the board? Thomas rose. He confirmed his identity, his relationship to Ruth, the circumstances of the will's execution, the escrow arrangements at Northern Trust. He was precise, unhurried, and completely unintimidated by the room. Margaret studied the document. Her eyebrows shifted slightly. This bequeaths 52% of Ashmore Capital shares to... She looked up at me. To me. Yes. Celeste made a sound. Not a word. Just a sound. That's a forgery. Her voice was sharp. Dad, that is a forgery. I'd be careful making that claim without evidence, Thomas said, evenly. Morrison and Blake's reputation has been built over 40 years. I'd recommend your attorney review it before you make accusations you'll need to defend. She was sick. My father stood now. My mother's health was declining in 2019. She was not in a position to... Ruth Ashmore was in full cognitive function until January of 2021, Thomas interrupted, still without any apparent urgency. The will was witnessed by 2 independent notaries, and I have sworn affidavits from both, as well as from her attending physician at the time of execution. I'm confirming she was competent and uncoerced. Then she was manipulated, my father said. Someone got to her. I let that sit for 1 second. Just one. The woman who built this company from a single room on the South Side in 1968, who negotiated with aldermen and developers and city planners for 50 years, who sat in this boardroom until she was 82. She was manipulated. By me. At 24. I kept my voice level. Is that the argument you want to make to this board? The silence that followed was the specific kind that happens when something true has been said in a room full of people who can feel it. Margaret, I said, I'd like to read the relevant passage from the will. She nodded. I found the paragraph. I read it the way Ruth had taught me to read everything that mattered. Slowly, completely, giving every word its full weight. To my granddaughter, Nadia Claire Ashmore, I bequeath 52% of my shares in Ashmore Capital LLC, along with all associated voting rights, currently valued at approximately $47 million. This bequest is made with full knowledge of how my son Warren has treated Nadia throughout her life. She has been dismissed, diminished, and systematically excluded from the company I built. Not because of any failure of hers, but because of a failure of imagination in the people who were supposed to see her clearly. I paused. Nadia does not have a disability. She has a different architecture of mind. My voice held. I'd made a decision the night before that I would not cry in that room. Not because I was ashamed of it, but because this moment needed to be received clearly. And tears would make it about emotion when it needed to be about evidence. I have also included evidence of conduct the board will need to examine. I placed the USB drive on the table and connected it to the room's presentation system, which I'd confirmed with the building's AV staff at 7:30 that morning. Another thing nobody in that room had expected me to do. April 12th, 2017. An Ashmore Capital Board session. My grandmother Ruth was present as a shareholder. I pressed play. Warren's voice filled the room. The recording ran for 90 seconds. The passage where he described Ruth as having a sentimental rather than strategic relationship to the company. The passage where he said continuity sometimes requires us to be honest about who is capable of guiding us forward. The passage, the one I'd chosen specifically, where he said, in a room where Ruth was present and listening. The founder's attachment to the original model is understandable. It's also a liability. I stopped the recording. My father said nothing. Margaret Osei looked at him for a long moment. Then at me, then back at the will. The 2017 resolution to reclassify your mother's voting rights, she said. It failed. 5-3. Ruth's vote and Dorothy's vote were among the 5. I looked at Dorothy, who gave a small, precise nod. The founding partnership agreement, I placed it on the table, establishes that her original shares carry permanent voting rights that cannot be diluted without full board approval. She knew exactly what she had, and she knew what my father had tried to do with it. She documented both. and she planned accordingly. Philip Hartwell, who had been silent, spoke for the first time. Margaret, I think we need to have legal review the documents before we proceed further. Agreed. Margaret set down the will. Will recess. 45 minutes. Thomas, please remain available to our general counsel. The 45 minutes stretched to an hour and 20. I sat alone at the far end of the table. Thomas brought me water. Dorothy sat beside me for part of it without speaking, which was its own form of support. My father and Celeste stood near the windows at the room's far end. I could see their conversation without hearing it. The controlled urgency, the gestures, the moment when my father put his hand on Celeste's shoulder and she looked at the floor. My mother sat in a chair against the wall, separate from both of them, looking at her hands. When the board's general counsel, a man named Marcus Webb, who'd been with the company since 2011, returned to the room, he spoke quietly with Margaret for 2 minutes. Then he sat down. Margaret called the session back to order. Counsel has reviewed the submitted documents in consultation with the original filing attorney. She looked at her notes. The following has been confirmed. The will presented by Nadia Ashmore is valid under Illinois state law and supersedes all prior testamentary documents. The recording is authenticated by chain of custody documentation provided by Bryce and Whitmore. The founding partnership agreement establishes the voting rights structure as described. She looked up. Effective immediately, Nadia Claire Ashmore is the majority shareholder of Ashmore Capital. Someone on the board drew a breath. Someone else set down their pen. My father did not move. Additionally, Margaret continued, as majority shareholder, Nadia has the right to bring motions before the board, including motions pertaining to executive leadership and succession. She looked at me. Do you have a motion to bring forward? I stood. I thought about what Ruth had written. Use this with judgment, not with anger. I have one motion. My father's hands were flat on the table. His face had gone the color of old paper. I'm not moving to remove Warren Ashmore as CEO. Celeste's head came up. I'm requesting a structured transition review, a 60-day period in which the board assesses current executive leadership, evaluates the company's strategic direction, and determines whether the succession plan announced last night is the plan that serves Ashmore Capital's next decade, or whether it serves one family member's idea of legacy. During this review period, I'm asking that no irreversible decisions about succession be finalized. No titles confirmed, no shares transferred, no employment agreements executed. I looked around the table. If the review concludes that the current plan is sound, I will support it. If it concludes otherwise, the board will have the information it needs to act accordingly. This is not a removal. It's a question. And every well-run company should be willing to answer its own questions. Margaret looked around the table. Is there a second? Seconded, Dorothy said immediately. Discussion? Grace Ewan spoke. I think this is a reasonable and measured request given the circumstances. Philip Hartwell. Agreed. My father's voice came out tight. This is a calculated attack designed to... Warren. Margaret's tone closed it. You'll have full opportunity to participate in the review process. That opportunity begins in 60 days. She looked at the room. All those in favor of the structured transition review as described? 12 hands. Opposed? 3. My father's and 2 board members who owed their seats to his recommendations. 1 abstention. Motion carries. Margaret set down her pen. The review period begins today. My father caught me in the hallway outside the boardroom. My mother was with him. Celeste was behind them both. You had no right. His voice was low, carefully controlled, the way it always was when he was most dangerous. Whatever she told you, whatever she put in that box, she was a sick old woman who... She was your mother. I stopped walking. She was the woman who built everything you've spent 20 years taking credit for. She saw what you did in that room in 2017. She saw what you were planning to do to me, and she decided that the company she built deserved better than that. I kept my voice quiet, precise. I didn't take anything from you. She gave it to me. There's a difference. My mother stepped forward. Her eyes were wet. Nadia, sweetheart, we've always... Don't. It came out gently, but it stopped her. Please don't tell me you've always loved me. I know you love me. Love and seeing someone clearly aren't the same thing. You watched what happened in our house for 20 years, and you let it happen because it was easier than changing it. I looked at her. I don't hate you for that. I understand it. But I need you to understand it too before we can build anything real. She pressed her hand to her mouth. Celeste hadn't spoken. I looked at her now. She was watching me with an expression I didn't have a name for. Something between recognition and the specific shame of someone who has finally, too late, identified the thing they chose not to see. I'm not your enemy, I said to her. I never was. But I'm also not the version of me that you needed me to be so you could be comfortable. I picked up my portfolio. I'll be in touch about the review process. I walked to the elevator. I pressed the button. I waited. The doors opened and I stepped in. And as they closed, I looked back at the three of them standing in the hallway. My father, my mother, my sister. Framed by the architecture of a company built by a woman who had taught me everything about what it meant to see clearly. I thought about Ruth, about the Sunday afternoons, about the hand under the table at Jamie's graduation dinner when I was 14, and my father had made me invisible in front of 20 people. She'd held on. I held on. The elevator descended to the lobby, and when the doors opened, the April light hit the lobby windows and the city was there, ordinary and enormous, not waiting for anything in particular, just continuing, the way cities do. The 60-day transition review concluded on June 19th. The board's independent assessment found significant concerns about Ashmore Capital's strategic direction under current leadership. 3 major acquisition decisions in the past 4 years that had underperformed against projections. A management culture that multiple mid-level employees described in anonymous survey responses as hierarchical to the point of dysfunction, and a succession plan that had been treated as a personal inheritance rather than a governance decision. My father submitted his resignation on June 22nd. He didn't call me. He didn't need to. His attorney communicated with Thomas Bryce. The paperwork was handled efficiently and, with the specific courtesy that both sides extend when everyone in the room knows exactly what has happened and prefers not to examine it too closely. Margaret Osei was appointed interim CEO. The board began a formal search for permanent leadership with a mandate Ruth would have recognized: character first, credentials second. I was offered the title of Director of Strategic Development. I asked for 2 weeks to think about it, which is something the old version of me never would have done. The old version of me would have said yes immediately, grateful for any invitation to matter. I took the 2 weeks. I thought about what I actually wanted. Then I said yes. My first project was a green infrastructure initiative I'd been developing informally, in my own time. For 3 years, a framework for repositioning the company's aging commercial properties around sustainability standards that were coming down the pipeline from the city. It was the kind of analysis that required reading dense regulatory documents slowly and completely and noticing what was in the margins, the kind of thing I'd been doing since I was 12. Alone. For no credit. Because the work mattered more than the recognition. That part I was done with. The work would still matter. The recognition would come with it now. My mother and I started having lunch every other week in July. Awkward at first, the specific awkwardness of 2 people who love each other and have never quite spoken the same language. She's trying. I mean that without condescension. The trying is real, and it costs her something. and I see it. Celeste called me in August. She'd started therapy, she said, which she mentioned in the careful way people mention it when they're not sure how it will be received. I've been thinking about a lot of things, she said. Good, I said. So have I. We met for coffee on a Tuesday. We sat across from each other in a booth in a restaurant neither of us had been to before. Neutral ground, which was her suggestion, which told me the therapy was working. She said, I knew what was happening to you was wrong. I just told myself it wasn't my fight. She looked at her cup. I've been trying to figure out why that felt acceptable to me. And the honest answer is that fighting for you would have cost me something, and I wasn't willing to pay it. I let that sit. That's honest, I said. It's the least I could do. It's actually the most important thing. I looked at her. I don't need you to have been perfect. I need you to be real. And you're being real. We didn't hug when we said goodbye. We didn't make big plans. But we made a specific small plan. Coffee again in 2 weeks. The same booth. No agenda. She was there. So was I. We're writing something new, which is the only kind of thing worth writing when the old version is gone. There is a photograph on my desk now, in my office at Ashmore Capital. The real office. See, not the 7th floor cubicle where I spent 6 years doing work nobody credited me for. It's a photograph of Ruth from 1971. She's standing in front of her second property, a commercial building in Bridgeport, and she's looking directly at the camera with the expression of a woman who has just done something everyone around her said was impossible, and knows it, and doesn't need anyone else to confirm it. I look at it when a problem is difficult, which is often. Real problems are usually difficult. What she left me wasn't just 52% of a company, it was the proof of a thing she'd been trying to tell me since I was 8 years old. That the way you see the world isn't a flaw in your design. It's the design. The letters always moved on the page. The information always rearranged itself and took 3 times as long to settle. And I built, from that friction, a way of understanding things that nobody who reads quickly and easily ever had to build. I see around things. She told me that when I was 11. It took me 18 more years to understand it as the asset it always was. My name is Nadia Ashmore. I'm 29 years old. And for most of my life, my own family would have told you, carefully, with plausible deniability, in the language of concern rather than cruelty, that I was the one who didn't quite add up. They were wrong. And the proof isn't the title on my door, or the shares in my name, or the board meeting where 16 people watched everything my father thought he'd secured dissolve in front of him. The proof is something quieter than that. It's every Sunday afternoon at a dining room table on Lakeshore Drive. It's a woman with arthritic hands spreading out old contracts and saying, "You see how all the pieces connect." It's a wooden box on a closet shelf, waiting for the right moment. Because someone who loved me understood that I would need to be ready before the moment arrived, and that readiness was mine to build, not hers to hand me. You don't have to inherit a company to understand this. You don't have to have a grandmother who spent 4 years engineering your vindication. But you do have to stop organizing your life around the version of you that people who weren't paying attention invented. Stop asking for permission from people who decided who you were before you had any say in the matter. The people who dismissed you weren't seeing clearly. They weren't seeing you at all. They were seeing the story they needed about you, because the truth was inconvenient for them. The truth is inconvenient for a lot of people. That's almost always a sign it matters. My grandmother built a company from nothing, and then spent the last years of her life making sure the right person would protect it. She chose the grandchild who got C-minuses, the one who listened to audiobooks in the dark, the one who read contracts like architecture instead of like language. She chose the one who saw around things. Go around, she told me. Go around. If you've been the one in the back of the room, at the wrong table, in the wrong seat, told in 100 small and large ways that the future being planned doesn't include you. I want to tell you one thing. Build anyway. Build in the dark, in the copy room, on the index cards, in the slow, careful hours when nobody is watching and nobody is keeping track. Build the thing that proves what they couldn't see, not for them. For the version of yourself that deserves to arrive somewhere real, the moment will come when everything you built in the quiet has to walk into a room and stand on its own. Make sure it has somewhere to stand. My grandmother taught me that. I'm still learning to live it, but I'm learning.